My name is Danielle Zachman, and I've really gathered a lot from the interpersonal communications class this semester. If you'll look through my actual paper that I've written, you'll notice that I touch on a few different topics. But I started with motivational CQ and culture competency for a reason. I started with culture competency because it is something that is very prevalent in my workplace, as I work with people from so many different cultures, ethnicities, and that's not just my coworkers, it's patients too. And I found that in order to have the best working relationship with somebody, you need to understand why and what they are trying to communicate, not just what they are saying. Those language barriers are very real. And while I understand that I do possess motivational CQ, it was developed very early for me, and it was something that was very prevalent in my life, and it has been prevalent for many years now. I understand that it's not something that everybody goes on to develop or understands right away the importance of it. I know that I talked about one incident with a particular nurse, Laren, and the stereotyping and lumping together that he personally received as part of a group. And while I understand that stereotyping and racism portion of it is very prevalent, I have also found that being willing to learn about other people's cultures and understand why they are doing something is just as important as understanding what they are doing. Because yes, anyone can tell you that you look so pretty, you look so skinny. I've come to learn that working with these different Filipino nurses and aides, male and female, that it's not always a strange thing. That's not something that was ever super common for me in my own personal life growing up. But I've learned working with them that it's friendly and it's kind. And that has probably saved a lot of trouble because they develop someone that, that they can probably count on as a friend who's not going to consider them strange or weird for saying, "Oh, you look so skinny," or touching my hair when it was longer. I used to have very, very long hair. And I remember the first time that someone at work, Mark, had flipped around my ponytail and was like, "Wow, it's beautiful." I remember feeling a little bit strange, but I ended up looking into it more on my own free will because I was curious. I wanted to understand what was normal without making them feel uncomfortable. And that's just one example of my own personal motivational CQ. I feel like the willingness to learn has really allowed me to learn more than just about other cultures. It's allowed me to learn more about the experiences, the insights, and the opinions of people who maybe were raised a different way than me or had different experiences both in work and in public life. I feel the part about knowing what they experience in their own day-to-day lives compared to me has been really important because I've worked with many patients who don't speak the same language as me, or they come from a different background. And being able to get to know them and where they come from has been just as beneficial as being able to actually provide them the care they need. It's allowed me to have these open, honest conversations and really make actual gains. We've had so many homeless patients come through different places where I've worked, and just listening to them and trying to provide as much support as you can has been equally beneficial as helping them down to the rehab unit or working with them on their own rehab goals. Because yes, being able to move around in a wheelchair is important, but the motivation is there as well, because you can't treat everyone the same. You have to know how people need to be treated in order to feel fair. And while that might not make a lot of sense, it's like if I were to approach a woman in her 60s and talk to her in the same casual, joking way that I might somebody in their 20s, they're going to react differently, and they have. And it's always really important to be able to remember that people who come from different cultures are going to feel more comfortable with different things. And it's important to practice your motivational CQ and that desire to learn more if you want to provide the best interpersonal relationship with these people that you can. I know I also talked a little bit about different relationships I've had with people at work that aren't so positive. One that I did focus on is with a current coworker of mine who felt that I was abusive towards a patient. However, this is also another example of interpersonal communication because they never approached me about it or asked me why I had done what I had done. What I had done was redirect a woman's arm so she wasn't hitting me. And while I could have moved out of the way, if I had done that, she likely would have fallen. And so as a result of that, and just not reaching out and asking those questions and trying to understand the motivations behind things, it has led to a lot of conflict. And one way that I really enjoyed trying to prevent and avoid this conflict and almost mitigate it is actually something that I learned in our book, the circumscribing. It's where you tend to avoid or limit your interactions with each other. And following that chapter, actually, chapter 8, I began using that a bit more at work with this particular person, just because I felt it was best to avoid conflict for my own well-being as well as theirs. An example of how I've been circumscribing with them is rather than just signing up for whatever unit I might prefer on the hall, I make an intentional effort to move to halls where I know they don't tend to favor them. It's been a lot of trying to limit some distance between us and put some distance there and limit the time we spend face to face. Because while I understand that you cannot avoid a coworker all the time, regardless of whatever conflicts you're having, sometimes the best way to handle those is to give each person a little bit of space, because it is healthcare and you will always have someone who is starting a fight or starting to start a fight with another person. And while I understand that, I personally don't have the interest in engaging with it. So that's one thing I really enjoyed about Section 8 was just Chapter 8 was coming up with different strategies to help avoid those conflicts and handle the conflicts that we were having at work. Because it's not just conflicts between me and this person, it's different conflicts between other aides and nurses and aides and kitchen staff and floor staff. And so Chapter 8 was actually very beneficial for me because I was able to work with scheduling, my DON, housekeeping, and just kind of separate and have those harder discussions with everyone about what we need from each other in order to have a good working relationship. Because we are not partners romantically. None of us are. However, the amount of time that we spend together and the level of stress that we tend to go through together, as well as the emotional intimacy that you experience side by side, can make it very difficult to separate the working aspect and the personal aspect and how you might view someone's communication with you. Another portion of our book that I really, really have found to be great was actually chapter 7. So, at my work, I am something called a lead CNA. What we do is we train, educate, stop rumors, answer questions. We are essentially a liaison between the admin, the DON, HR, and floor staff. And one part of chapter 7 that I found to be very beneficial for me as a lead CNA is the critical listening. Because rather than just acting as a soundboard for someone to vent and rant and complain, I was able to use the critical listening from section 3 to not only hear what they are saying and to allow them to feel heard by me or somebody that they consider to be a safe place to rant to, because we are generally supposed to remain unbiased and drama-free. But I've been able to sort of mold that general soundboard listening into critical listening, because I can listen to somebody tell me about their issues with another coworker and how they were doing things, but rather than just hearing it and swallowing it whole and then continuing about my day, I'm able to use the critical listening style and hear what they're saying, absorb the information, but block out any background noise that is coming through as well, and pull the factual information from it based on what I know to be true. And I've just found that to be a little bit more beneficial in terms of mitigating those issues with each other in the trainings, because you're able to provide actual education and figure out what's truly going wrong rather than just hearing them complain. People don't complain just to complain most of the time. A lot of the times, the complaints are based in an issue. And by using the critical listening, I found that it's a little bit easier to get to the issue and find what's actually causing it, rather than just accepting at face value that someone did something wrong. And then, as you've read through my paper at this point, you'll notice that there is one portion of my paper where I go away from my current workplace and touch more on my interpersonal relationships with people around me. I chose to focus on an interpersonal relationship with a former coworker of mine. I think the reason I've really focused on this particular relationship with somebody is because it has spanned a fair amount of time, and it has actually gone through quite a few stages and sections within our textbook. Because it started out first as a working relationship only. So the power dynamics were at one time a little bit different than they are now. They were a nurse and I was an aide. So that is definitely part of the power dynamic. And then eventually it became a little bit more of a mentorship, which is another portion of our textbook that we talk on. And while I really did enjoy that part of it, particularly of our relationship, I think that the friendly relations that I focused on was incredibly beneficial for my growth in healthcare and discovering what I wanted to do and discovering the kind of nurse that I wanted to be one day. Because we were able to have those generally positive interactions, those friendly ones where you felt comfortable asking questions. But it was still within the same role that we were having as mentor and student, as nurse and aide. But having those friendly relations with each other made it a little bit easier to learn to ask and to explore who they were as a person as well as myself. And through those, we were able to progress through a lot of the other stages too so far. And while we are not at a dating stage yet, that is for other unrelated reasons. But we've been able to develop a lot of those very emotional, intimate moments where there's been a sense of vulnerability and ability to talk to each other, and those friendly relations that we've had, as well as a little bit more of the deep secret sharing relationships, were incredibly beneficial. And while it's not really something that you look at and evaluate on a day-to-day basis, I really enjoyed evaluating this relationship. Neither one of us has had very good luck in our own lives with evaluating relationships and understanding what people might want from us, but it was very clarifying to be able to read through the stages and understand where we were at and understand why maybe it's not as passionate as you might expect for how close we are. And I think that that was very good for me, simply because it didn't just adjust expectations, but it made things a little bit clearer, especially as we both have a very monotone, flat communication style. So rather than reading it as this person doesn't care for me or this person's upset with me, it was easier to see it more as this person prefers a direct, linear style of conversation. And I feel like going forward, I will probably keep using a lot of these different styles of listening and ways of evaluating for different relationships, because while I enjoy communicating with people, I know that it can be very difficult to communicate with me sometimes, as I miss the social cues and I miss the secret hints and the body language of what people are saying, and I might not understand where people are at all the time, and I may not be able to communicate the best with others or be able to always understand right away what they are trying to tell me. So I think over all the different points that I talked on are all points that I'm probably going to be using a lot going forward and really trying to build on, because they don't just benefit my interpersonal relationships with other people or my relationships with coworkers or my relationships with patients, but they make it a little bit easier for me to understand how people are communicating with me and what those communications really mean. I hope you enjoyed my paper. It was an excellent class. Thank you.